Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
While waiting for her husband at the courthouse, the woman only smiled mysteriously, preparing an unexpected surprise. And as soon as her husband arrived with his bold mistress, Fernando and Rafaela's silver wedding anniversary fell on a Wednesday. Restaurant, gifts, flowers, guests. They had only intended to gather their closest people, yet the guest list grew to almost 30 people. Rafaela spun before the mirror in her new, luxurious dress, admiring herself. No, she still looks really good. More than 35 years old, but you wouldn't guess. Youthful, slim, knows how to dress with taste and present herself well. Not a wife, but a find for a successful businessman and loving husband. It doesn't matter that Fernando, with his eternal busyness, completely stopped going to the gym and the pool with her. He's gained weight, gotten rounder, moves and talks in a more languid manner. For her, he's still sweet, dear, beloved, the only one. Whoever he is, no matter how much he acts like a big shot or looks. He spends all his time at work. She's already forgotten when they last went out for dinner or to a theater premiere. Her husband always jokes. You go have fun with your friends at the bar, show off your dress in the theater lobby. A well-fed man can't understand the hungry. You're the free artist, while I'm the man bound by my work schedule. He kissed his wife on the cheek, then gently on the lips, and disappeared again. Meanwhile, she stayed behind working on another project. In her work, Rafaela combined a passion for two things, painting and flowers. Landscape design, it comes in many forms. Rafaela's works on paper and in gardens were always dedicated to one thing, blooming plants. For this reason, she often worked in tandem with her friend Paulina. Paulina was obsessed with the stone and wood elements that beautify country houses. Rafaela added tenderness to them. After her involvement, little bridges, gazebos, fountains, and arches turned into exotic flower beds. She had a knack for combining substances that, at first glance, seemed completely incompatible. She teased her husband, calling him her iron woodsman, her blacksmith, her steel knight. The explanation for these nicknames was simple. He worked in the primary metal processing industry. In her imagination, he made crude billets out of molten metal, which later became raw materials for the machine engineering industry. She never delved into those industrial depths. Her father had become a metallurgist and later an unknown head of a metallurgy company. Well, that was fine. She didn't need to burden herself with all that. Her mother couldn't handle it, divorced Rafaela's father, and ran off with a new husband to the far reaches of geography. Rafaela took after her mother's creative inclinations. Her mother wrote poems and admired daisies and buttercups. But for her, it was the North, the mistress of copper mountains, ores. Techniques and lyrics didn't align. She had to run away before the same lofty poet called her away. But the teenager, with a blacksmith father, wouldn't be lost and would grow into a strong person. In theory, her father had almost no time to raise her. But any good mother would have been in awe of him. He loved his daughter unconditionally. All other women were nothing to him, and all attempts to start a new family were thrown away. There were only two close people in his life, him and Rafaela. Any free moment was dedicated to her. And his heart and soul had already been given to her the moment this fragile being was born. He changed her diapers, bathed her, played with her, and adored her sweet scent. That's why his wife rightly thought Rafaela would be better off with her father. He raised her. He didn't break and didn't hold any grudges against his beloved wife. He was happy that she revealed her true nature not in old age when the principle of in sickness and in health is tested. She showed it earlier. She was, then vanished, and life went on. Rafaela was always intrigued. Could it be that her father, such a distinguished, attractive man, wasn't seeing anyone? But she never brought up such topics with him, even though they were real friends. They could talk about anything in the world, trusting each other. This topic felt forbidden to her. There were no outward signs of any romances on the side. If we were to summarize Rafaela's life before marriage in one word, it would be blissful. Full of comfort, interesting, soulful. The girl never felt inadequate growing up in an incomplete family. Her father was everything to her. He indulged her passion for painting. When she was old enough, he bought her a country plot where she could indulge in her love for lawns, flower beds, and plants. Let her enjoy it. For a woman, it's a beautiful and quite sensible hobby. Seeing that Rafaela had no intention of abandoning her passion, her father sent her to study at the National Institute of Design. Before that, he made sure she learned to use specialized programs for creating design projects. This skill not only proved useful in her studies, but it also helped her find a husband. No kidding, it's true. At first, Rafaela was still getting settled in the capital. They hadn't rented her an apartment yet, so she stayed in the student dorm for a while. She solved her computer issues at an internet cafe a couple of blocks away. She'd come in, take the largest cup of cappuccino, a plate of oatmeal cookies, and dive into her next design project. She would allocate different types of still-blooming flowers across the grounds of her imaginary projects. Several dormitories were located near the student campus, including the Polytechnic University's dormitory. The clientele at the cafe varied. The main crowd was young people. That's how she met the future designer, obsessed with plants and flowers, and the future metallurgist, passionate about ores and alloys. Rafaela considered meeting the guy who shared the same passion as her beloved father to be fateful. Everything clicked right away. It became clear that both of them took the relationship seriously. They spent the long summer holidays visiting Rafaela's homeland, where her father arranged a tour of a metallurgical plant for her boyfriend. The young man's eyes lit up, leaving no doubt that he had chosen his profession not for fun or romance. He genuinely loved it. While the guest took a shower, the father and daughter had a brief conversation. "It seems to me that this guy is no fool. In time, he'll turn out to be a solid professional in our field," said the man. "Dad, he treats me with as much seriousness as he does his future, possibly our shared future. I'm pregnant. Fernando doesn't know yet. We've been living together in my apartment for the last 2 months. I needed to hear what you think." "What can I say, my daughter? I wouldn't want my grandchild to grow up in an incomplete family like you did. You shouldn't delay talking to Fernando. You're both just 19. It's not a bad thing. You'll be very young when your child grows up. You'll be able to live and enjoy life while he grows. Right now, I'll support you both, financially and spiritually. I'll hire assistants for you in the capital, a nanny for the baby, and a housekeeper. Just don't do anything silly. Don't delay having the baby for some future time. It's risky for your health, and it will be too big a test for your relationship." Fernando was over the moon when he found out his beloved was pregnant. People's fates and love stories are all so different. Rafaela and Fernando's relationship from the start was so smooth, cozy, and soulful that it could easily be included in a textbook on family idols. Everything fell into place for them. They've been together for 25 years. They're barely 45. They've done it all. Walked hand in hand through a colorful and happy life, raised 2 sons to almost adulthood. People often say that such couples are 2 halves of a whole. When the guests raise their glasses at their silver wedding anniversary to toast their family, they won't be lying when they praise them. Rafaela spun before the mirror again, smiling at herself. "Gorgeous, and Fernando is just perfect for me." She grew sad. It was a shame her father hadn't lived to see this special day. He would have been so happy for them, for Fernando, and their sons. The sons, however, weren't in a hurry to get married, giving all sorts of excuses in their defense. "Mom, Dad, we haven't met our halves yet. We want everything to be perfect, just like you. Don't start complaining that you'll never have grandchildren. Everything has its time. You're both so young." After finishing their studies, Fernando and Rafaela decided not to stay in the capital. Why would they want to live that hectic life? Rafaela's father was happy to have a professional helper in the company. For a couple of years, he kept an eye on how Fernando handled his tasks, then made him his deputy. He built a house for his son-in-law, daughter, and their 2 sons. The boys were born close together. Their parents decided that since the heavens had sent them a second child at such a young age, it must be meant to be. Rafaela's father started falling ill not so long ago, but it happened quickly and sharply. Tests revealed he had diabetes, which meant a whole new lifestyle, different routines and rhythms of life. No indulgence with sweets or fatty foods. A strict diet, constant monitoring of blood sugar levels. Rafaela could hardly believe her eyes and ears. Her sensible, educated, and knowledgeable father became a stubborn boy when it came to dealing with doctors. No respect for authority, no discipline, no obedience, no timely injections. He did whatever he wanted. As if in punishment for all the protests, the illness gripped him with a vice-like hold. After another insulin mix-up, when he failed to administer his dose at the right time due to his own carelessness, he slipped into a diabetic coma. He was alone at home. By the time Rafaela arrived to check why he wasn't answering phone calls, precious time had been lost. Not even money, nor Fernando's medical connections, nor Rafaela's frantic runaround with doctors could save the head of the metallurgy company. His vital functions could not be restored. When her father passed, Rafaela felt as though her life had ended. But Fernando was there, her hope, her support, her rock. She survived, slowly learned to smile again, and to enjoy life. Now, she and the ever-jovial Paulina stood in the women's restroom of a restaurant, gossiping about common acquaintances who had arrived for the silver wedding anniversary. Paulina joked, "Rafaela, everyone else is just like people, but you and I are so beautiful. You look amazing in that dress. The turquoise color really suits your brown eyes. Who would have thought such an unusual combination of 2 shades could work?" And Patricia, with her pink suit, really went a little overboard. "She's a great woman, no doubt, but in that outfit, she looks like a very clean, well-scrubbed little pig." The 2 women finished powdering their noses, but Paulina still wouldn't leave the room. Then, suddenly, she asked Rafaela a pointed question. "Rafaela, is everything really okay between you and Fernando?" Rafaela quickly turned around. "Why do you ask?" She knew Paulina too well. She wouldn't have asked such a question out of nowhere, especially on a day like this. "I was a witness to a strange scene from a puzzling play." The banquet had been going on for a couple of hours when the first major break was announced. Fernando immediately dashed to the side, into a niche, as soon as people began to scatter from the table. My bag was sitting right by the windowsill. I reached for my lipstick, and I couldn't help but overhear part of a conversation. "Baby, stop being so picky. I really can't be with you today. You know why." In that moment, his gaze landed on me, and he stopped mid-sentence, quickly finishing with a business tone. "We'll settle all the paperwork tomorrow. I need to go." Paulina paused for a moment before adding, "This weird conversation really smells like a love affair on the side. Or am I just a 2-humped camel?" She laughed, but it was clear that this conversation was not easy for her. Finally, she added, "Anyway, we're all under the influence of wine vapors here. You might want to keep an eye on Fernando, Rafaela. Maybe my story is just a product of my sick imagination, a woman who no longer believes in big, bright love after 3 divorces. I stopped being an optimist long ago." The conversation with Paulina did not leave Rafaela unaffected. She became wary. She and Fernando had always trusted each other without question. They were careful with each other's personal space. It never even crossed their minds to snoop in each other's phones, computers, or even the glove compartment of the car. It was a taboo they never even discussed. The rule had formed naturally and was respected. Many thoughts crossed Rafaela's mind. Paulina had been drinking. Perhaps she had imagined everything. Fernando never used the word baby like that. It didn't sound like him. He never used those endearing nicknames like sweetie, darling, or cutie at home. It wasn't that they were against cute terms, it just never felt right for them from the start. At home, Fernando was impeccable. If he was only playing the role of the perfect husband, but wasn't really one, he surely would have earned an Oscar statue from the Hollywood Academy of Motion Picture Arts. After the noisy anniversary party, he returned to work. He came back at night, but that schedule had been his for the last 10 years. He couldn't have been going around with someone else while pulling the wool over her eyes. He would have slipped up at some point. Everything seemed to be the same as always. She struggled with herself, questioning her patience. Should I snoop through my husband's phone or leave this Pandora's box unopened? Her intuition remained silent, unwilling to answer her questions. After a few days of inner conflict tearing her apart, Rafaela could no longer endure the agony. Late at night, when Fernando fell into a deep, sound sleep, Rafaela pulled his phone from under his pillow and locked herself in the bathroom. Whatever happens, even if he wakes up, what's meant to be will happen. Fernando's phone had an extensive contact list. Rafaela scrolled through it, staring at the names and faces in the avatars. She knew almost everyone on the list, at least vaguely. No suspicious contacts. Except for some initials LVN, and instead of a photo, there was a picture of an orchid. Rafaela was a high-class specialist in her field. She would never confuse that flower with anything else. She pressed the call button automatically. At that moment, not even a dozen strong men could have stopped her eager fingers. Her nerves were on edge. The breaking point in the battle with uncertainty had been reached. The call was answered unexpectedly by a bright, distinctly feminine voice. "Baby, what's wrong, missing me? I'm not asleep yet, can you believe it? Watching a romantic series. What about your old lady? Is she not home and you decided to call me?" Rafaela sank to the cold bathroom floor tiles. This blow was below the belt. Old lady meant her, and baby was Fernando. She hadn't noticed at all, but the family boat had already cracked deeply. On one hand, this crack was smeared with her naivety, believing the world was noble, on the other, with trust in the closest person. She scanned the spacious room. Black spots swam before her eyes. A minute ago, her reliable universe had shattered. At least they had bought separate apartments for the children. She didn't have to keep up appearances anymore, with her face wet from tears. Nothing would ever be the same again. The perfect family was no more. It hurt so much, unbearably. Rafaela trudged to the bedroom, where her chosen one, her beloved person, still slept peacefully, unaware that his life had just taken a sharp turn. His wife was the kind of person who, when she loved with all her heart, would never forgive infidelity. How many suitors had tried to make advances to her over the 20 years of marriage? She had always firmly rejected them, humorously explaining, "You all know I'm married to the most wonderful man in the world. Did you really think I would trade him for any of you?" With great effort, she climbed into bed next to her husband. The resentment was endless, the wound bled too much. Now, he disgusted her. I wonder whose idea it was to call me old lady. Was it Fernando's or his mistress's? What does it matter? We don't even know how old this voice's owner is. He surely didn't find her in kindergarten. Rafaela remembered how, at Paulina's birthday party, she had introduced them to Fernando and her latest young lover. How her husband had complained all the way home. "No, Rafaela, explain this to me. A big age gap between a man and a woman is a disaster. What's there to talk about? How could they possibly spend time together?" Back then, Rafaela had calmed him down, convincing him that Paulina would sort out her own men. And he kept insisting he wouldn't get involved with a woman much older or much younger than him. But all his words turned out to be lies. How can we know how we'll behave in a particular situation? Why make promises in advance? Rafaela felt like she was slowly losing her mind from the mad torrent of thoughts. She moved even further from Fernando, even though she loved waking up in his arms. Bear, you're going to break me in the middle of the night with those paws of yours. Look, Fernando, soon you won't even fit through the doorframe. And he smiled contentedly in response, pulling her toward him again, burying his nose in her shoulder and growling. How I love the smell of your herbal shampoo. Do you mix some kind of potion in it so I'll always be enchanted by you? This scene between them happened quite recently, on Wednesday morning, the day of their silver wedding anniversary. So it turns out her playful kitten was lying, wanting her to remain in blissful ignorance? Why? What is he trying to achieve? Rafaela had no answers to these questions. In another apartment, she frowned slightly, placed her phone on the sofa, and stretched. What are these late-night calls from Fernando? Maybe his wife finally woke up and interrupted their conversation? He never bothered her at such a late hour before. Looks like he really missed her. After making herself a cheese sandwich, the young woman returned to the TV. Her lover often scolded her for living a disorganized life. She liked to sleep in during the day and stay awake at night. She rolled her eyes dramatically, once again explaining to the clueless caretaker. I don't work, sweetheart. You made me quit, saying my main role now is to be your girlfriend, your beloved woman. You take care of everything else, right? And what kind of job is that, junior commander over senior janitors? That pitiful office and housing services, those grumpy old retirees always coming in to complain about their utility bills. The salary's tiny, endless arguments and scandals all day. I'm so happy my night freed me from this nightmare. She knew how to convince Fernando of anything. She was incredibly beautiful, young, and fresh. She never stayed in a bad mood. She constantly came up with ideas to make their dates amazing. A woman is a celebration. He was dying from passion next to her. He was willing to do anything, especially when she would suddenly look at him with a curious gaze and then pass her verdict. My God, you're so handsome. Who would believe you're already 45 years old? I wouldn't give you more than 30. You're so youthful and beloved. It's like some kind of miracle. We've been together for 2 years, and you just keep getting more beautiful every day. And this prize is mine. I adore you, sweetheart. Come to me, I've missed you so much. Fernando didn't walk to her, he flew. He didn't care that he was 25 years older than this little thing. She couldn't have been deceiving him so skillfully for this long. He was truly in love, and her feelings only grew stronger with each meeting. He knew people well after commanding the large team for several decades. They met by chance on a bus. Fernando had forgotten when the last time was that he took public transportation. And then this happened. It was time to change the winter tires to summer ones. The guys at the auto service overcharged him, and they needed more time. The mechanic and the specialists advised against using a taxi. The bus stop was only 3 minutes away, and it passed right by their country house. A short walk in the cool spring air. No inconvenience, just pure enjoyment. Later, Fernando often thought that on the day of their first meeting, the stars had miraculously aligned to make it happen. He thought it was a sign that Patricia was his woman. He didn't want to think that he had once been so sure that Rafaela was his soulmate. He was wrong. His entire life with his wife now felt like a rehearsal before the real love of his life. Patricia, on the bus, had smiled condescendingly and given her seat to an elderly lady, moving to the back, where Fernando stood with his business portfolio in his right hand. The girl wasn't foolish when it came to life. She quickly realized that this well-dressed man felt like a fish out of water on the bus. When a couple vacated 2 seats in the back, she decided to help the gentleman adjust to his unfamiliar surroundings and invited him to sit next to her. They started talking. They still had quite a way to go before reaching their destination. The young woman charmed him with just a few phrases. It seems like you're not feeling very comfortable in this bus. It's written on your face that you deserve only a comfortable seat in a luxury car. What else is written on my face, young lady? Fernando laughed at her compliment. There's not much of an age difference between us, the girl replied. You're about 30 at most, and I just turned 18. We're practically from the same generation. Fernando, though not a fool, was struck speechless by this lie, and it hit him hard. The bus windows had already darkened with dusk. When his seatmate got ready to leave, he offered to walk her to her dormitory. Patricia was studying the intricacies of housing and communal services at a training center. Fernando had never strayed from his wife before, but now it was like a demon had possessed him. Everything was new, unexplored. Patricia twisted him around, and he loved every minute of it. The girl was already cunning, experienced. She'd been through many young men. But here was a grown man, ready to do anything for her. A luxurious car, elegant clothes, a delicious perfume, expensive accessories. After a month, he rented Patricia a lovely apartment in a new building on the outskirts. She refused the car, too lazy to learn traffic rules and get a license. Fernando came to his princess often, every other day. The rest of her time was spent lounging, watching TV series, sleeping, or going to the sea with a friend. Fernando never suggested taking his lover to Turkey or Greece. Interestingly, the young woman didn't enjoy socializing much. So, the fact that they didn't go to restaurants, didn't travel on vacations, and weren't seen out together didn't bother her at all. She was the type of woman who, with age, would turn into a domestic hen. Everything was cozy, comfortable. There was no need for anything else. For almost 2 years, Patricia lived like this, happy with everything. But as often happens in life, something unexpected came along. It happened this time as well. Her mother came to visit her. And then the daughter began to annoy her with this and that. Your house is full of everything, daughter, but it's not enough. You have to get the main status from this rich man, his lawful wife. You say they've been married for almost 25 years, and there are sons. So, maybe you should switch to someone younger. Why bother with this daddy? Mom, what are you saying? Fernando is so sweet and obedient, he fulfills all my wishes. I even managed to send money to help you. I've always liked men of a more mature age. Her mother laughed. You're telling me you love him like crazy? Patricia paused for a moment. I don't love him, but I'm not disgusted by him. I could live with him for a long time and not know any trouble. Hearing this, her mother immediately concluded. Well then, get to work. Separate him from his wife forever. You want to stick your little hand into his family's feeding trough, don't you? Then do it. If she were to be honest, Patricia was a bit embarrassed by her mother's old-fashioned views. But sometimes, it was worth listening to her. After sending her mother home, Patricia thought long and hard. Her mother was right. Her lover didn't skimp on material help, that's a fact. The fact that they were always together, that didn't bother her, quite the opposite. She wasn't sure how they'd live together, but time would tell. Now, at 20, everything seemed easy. But in 5 years, without a beautiful stamp in her passport, life wouldn't be so fun. Also, she really loved children, and she saw her future surrounded by a couple of cute little kids who would look up to her like a goddess. She considered a family without children to be incomplete. And Fernando was getting older, he still had to raise their children. So, it was time to change the power dynamics. She started talking to the man about this the very next day. His reaction stunned her. He agreed to leave his wife and take half of their joint property. He assured her that it would be enough for a comfortable life with his little princess, his sweetie, his beloved girl. Patricia pouted and began to complain that he could have come up with something more clever to make their income after the divorce substantial. After all, hadn't he worked so hard for his wife and her father's company all these years? Patricia hinted to the man that he could try to find other ways to warm his hands here. That day, Fernando returned home somewhat flustered. He still didn't doubt that Patricia was the woman of his life, his prize, and his male luck. But he had never stolen from the family business before, never taken juicy bits from the profitable metallurgy deal. He spent the night with his laptop, trying to come up with some schemes to enrich himself at the company's expense. By morning, a relatively clean method of embezzling funds had been devised. The executive director was ready to implement it for the sake of his beloved's happiness. Time was ticking. By morning, after nearly a sleepless night in bed with Fernando, Rafaela decided not to act hastily. She would follow her husband after work, find out where his lover lived, watch them from a distance, and then, only later, confront him about the affair. The morning passed like clockwork. Fernando sleepily greeted her, grabbed his phone, and disappeared into the bathroom with it. She would have never noticed such behavior before, but now, in everything he did, she sensed a hidden meaning. Her plans to delay confronting her husband failed miserably. Fernando appeared in their bedroom just a few minutes later, fuming. "Rafaela, I'm confused. Did you take my phone last night and go through it?" She didn't have the strength to start the inevitable conflict, but she knew how to take a hit. "Yes, I did. And I even called one of the numbers listed in your contacts. It's saved as LWN. Care to explain that abbreviation?" They rarely argued. They lived outwardly in harmony. Now, both were bewildered, both searching for the right words. Fernando eventually spoke. "Rafaela, this had to happen at some point. You can't keep a secret forever. I fell in love with another woman. Neither of us is to blame for this. It just happened, and I can't change it. My passion for her is stronger than me. She's everything we were not. Believe me, I never meant to hurt you." She stayed silent. What should she say? Argue, shout? Beg him to stay with her and leave the other woman? It seemed absurd. She didn't know how to respond. Inside, there was such emptiness as if her soul had been taken out and trampled in front of a crowd. Just yesterday, they were toasting to their happiness, and today, the old woman and the kitten were on opposite sides of the river called life. Rafaela cleared her throat. For some reason, she really needed to ask this question. "Why does your girlfriend call me an old woman? Is it your idea, or is it her personal fantasy? She's just being ironic. There's a big age gap between us, but that doesn't interfere with real love, does it?" Rafaela raised her eyebrows in surprise. Wow, her husband was casually sharing his news and feelings with her. Her patience snapped. A volcano erupted inside her, filled with resentment and confusion. This could not have happened to her. Anyone but Fernando. She thought to herself that even the pile of gifts and beautiful wrapping, still unpacked on the table in the living room, seemed like a distant memory. Silver boxes, bright ribbons, vases filled with her favorite flowers all around the house. How could she reconcile all these gifts with the bitter disappointment? How could she move forward? How could she live without him, her beloved man? What did she feel for Fernando now? She couldn't answer that question. It all felt like a terrible nightmare. She thought she'd wake up and everything would be over. She almost decided that, right after Fernando left for work after their conversation, she would put on her pajamas, wrap herself in a blanket, and sleep off the sleepless night. But then the intercom buzzed at the gate. The screen displayed a woman with heavily made-up features. When asked what she wanted, the woman cheerfully replied that her name was Patricia, and they needed to talk. Rafaela didn't expect this from her husband's mistress. Automatically, she pressed the intercom button. The model-like woman stormed in. "Fernando already told me everything. You've talked. There's no need to hide anything anymore. What's with the look? Yes, it happens. Men leave their wives for their lovers. It's all inevitable." Rafaela immediately thought of the phrase, "Once a traitor, always a traitor." But she said something entirely different. "What exactly does your visit mean, then? Do you have something to say to me, or did you come to dance on the ashes of our family fire?" Patricia sat down in the chair without an invitation, crossed her legs, looked around, and finally spoke. "I hope you understand that this is a divorce. Your sons are already adults, so there won't be any major obstacles. We'll deal with your father's inheritance and your joint property. Fernando will explain our terms later. Rafaela couldn't believe her ears. Some little tramp, a skinny girl, was going to dictate the terms of her divorce with Fernando? No way. She wanted to grab a rich, successful man? Fine. But first, the wife would make the final decision. Rafaela quickly ushered the guest out of the house, almost by the ear. Patricia's confidence quickly dissipated. She obediently marched out of the courtyard in her high heels, only stopping to turn around and declare triumphantly, "I'm not saying goodbye. We'll see each other again." Rafaela filed for divorce that same day. Their sons were already adults, so there wouldn't be any issues there, but the property situation turned out to be much more complicated. She had trusted Fernando so much that she never bothered reading the documents that he or her father brought for her to sign. They never seemed to hide anything. Everything they bought and acquired was simply signed over to her and the head of the family. It was considered unofficially that this was the right and proper way. Seeing all of this, Rafaela grabbed her head. She had never been careless, but somehow everything had been accumulating, growing, expanding. But let it be. She hadn't paid attention to the details. There were so many documents that Rafaela soon realized she would have to ask her father's old lawyer, a trusted friend, for help. Alberto Garcia greeted Rafaela as if he had known she would come to him for help with her divorce. "So, you decided to part ways with Fernando? It's about time. No matter how long the string twists, the truth will always come out. Alejandro, my dear friend, predicted that you wouldn't stay in the dark about your husband's infidelity for long." Rafaela stared in amazement at the silver-haired man, who had a knowing glint in his eyes. The question escaped her lips. Did my father know Fernando had a mistress? Alberto squinted. At first, he only had suspicions. Your husband started disappearing instead of going to work, heading off to unknown places. Alejandro assigned the security service to investigate. The day he left, he handed me the report with the photos. He made sure to pass it on to me. He gave me a few instructions that would ensure your future. He was so upset that he got sick right in my office. He had to go home to rest. I walked him to his car. He was pale. I should have gone with him, but I had another meeting scheduled. But I followed through on everything he asked. Let me show you all the documents. Rafaela sat down. After a few minutes, the lawyer spread out several folders in front of her. She opened the first one and froze. Inside was a document titled "Will with Conditions." She began to study it closely. The papers didn't mention any of the property that she and Fernando had received or used after her father's death. It was about something completely different. In her name were deeds for real estate in the United Arab Emirates, a house in Switzerland, 2 apartments in the capital, and a country house on the coast. She read the clause again, which stated that the will should only be read if she decided to file for divorce. If there was no divorce, all the mentioned property would be passed to her 2 grandchildren in equal shares, but only after they married. How convoluted, she voiced her thoughts. Why did my father do all this? Not convoluted, but wise, Alberto said firmly. You could never get enough of your husband. Your union seemed so solid that even hints of cracks seemed fantastic. You have a big, solid house, cars in the garage, and a garden full of flowers if you want some fresh air. Your boys have everything: apartments, cars, money in the bank. Alejandro always said he couldn't figure out why a woman like you, without a penny to your name, could flutter around your lawns like a carefree butterfly. A woman like you could be easily deceived. But no one understood that all the world's treasures really mean nothing to you. You have a roof over your head, a table, and your loved ones close by. You're happy. You wouldn't fight anyone for material things. You could stand up for yourself if you wanted to, but would you? I hope you're not offended. The real estate agents helped me find and choose these properties. I flew out, inspected everything on site, and was satisfied. But I didn't touch you until the time was right, as my dear friend Alejandro instructed. I only gave you these papers when I saw that you were really going to divorce Fernando, so you'd have something like an emergency oxygen tank for a diver or a solid stash for a rainy day. Rafaela, you might as well have ordered an accounting audit of your father's company. You own the controlling stake. You're the full-fledged owner, yet you hardly ever show up at the office, while your husband holds only 20%. All these young lovers are just predators, like hungry sharks that go after their prey, always trying to grab everything they can after divorces. It wouldn't hurt to find out what the real state of affairs is in the metallurgical business that your dear husband oversees. They talked a bit more about how Rafaela's divorce from Fernando would probably involve a court case. It was clear that her husband and his lover would fight for every little thing. Rafaela was prepared for any battle, even though the inner whining had stopped. Something had frozen forever in her heart, a chunk of ice that could never be melted. If someone had told Fernando that he would risk the company he had devoted more than 20 years to for the sake of beautiful eyes, he would have spat in that person's face. But Patricia had gone wild. She wouldn't let him close, wouldn't say sweet compliments if he reported that some process was delayed. He had never had to report to a woman before. But Patricia was his obsession. Without her by his side, he didn't breathe right, he only lived to wait for the next meeting. He could hardly lie next to Rafaela anymore, constantly fearing that he would call her by the wrong name. But it was still too early to leave home. He had to appease his wife, celebrate their silver wedding anniversary, and play the role of the dutiful husband. The day he started his shady deals at work, he set a timeline for how long he could remain with his unloved wife, constantly dreaming of his beloved Patricia. Patricia had called Rafaela the young old woman. He indulged her, agreed, and laughed at his wife together with his mistress. At work, Fernando now spent his time secretly mocking his subordinates. He implemented a harsh system of fines for the smallest infractions. The work of metallurgists wasn't easy as it was, and now, to avoid losing their bonuses, the lower staff was tormented by the slightly higher management. Recently, Fernando had witnessed a scene in the foundry. One of the steelworkers had made a small mistake that delayed the start of the smelting process by a few minutes, and the punishment from the foreman was too severe. The worker threw his helmet on the ground, turned around, and hissed through his teeth. "To hell with all of you. You've turned the factory into an old people's home. Is everyone here an agronomist now? Who's going to work, dear bosses?" People were quitting the company in droves. The HR department was overwhelmed, trying to keep the core of the company intact, which everything else depended on. Rumors spread through the city that the company was spiraling out of control. And this was on top of the fact that Fernando had started siphoning off money from his father-in-law's business under false pretenses. He no longer knew what he was doing and couldn't stop. His ultimate goal was to drive down the price of the company's shares so that he could later buy out the controlling stake from Rafaela, or at least another 31% of the stock, adding to the 20% he already owned. Fernando understood that after the divorce, his share of the jointly acquired property would not be very large. But he wasn't a complete scoundrel. He would share with his sons, whom he genuinely loved, and ensure their secure future. What would be left for Patricia's greedy ambitions would be nearly nothing, dust. But owning the plant, controlling its future, and profiting from it, that was something else. He would be able to quickly repair the damage he caused in the production process and regain control of the industry giant. At that moment, Rafaela was still far removed from the realities of metallurgy, laboring over another project. She spent hours sitting at the computer with Paulina, carefully planning how to arrange flowers and greenery next to her friend's stone installations. She had no interest in the affairs of her father's company. It was enough that Fernando almost lived at work. She, being a delicate woman, preferred to think about the composition of flowers and bushes instead. Then there were the pleasant preparations for the silver anniversary, errands, and trips to shops and beauty salons. Did she ever think at that time that she was walking 7 league steps toward the end of their happy marriage? Of course not. After the visit to the lawyer, Rafaela was once again deep in thought. She connected her father's death with her husband's behavior. She scolded herself for not being more observant, for not noticing the obvious. She hadn't immediately realized that she had been drawing different types of orchids on sheets of paper and then cutting the drawings into pieces with manicure scissors. One thought kept spinning in her head. I will never use these flowers in my design projects again. It's a beautiful plant, but it can hurt the soul with its hidden poison. One such orchid took my husband from me. Lies, beauty doesn't save the world. What saves it is warmth and soulfulness. By evening, the couple realized they couldn't stay under the same roof. Fernando packed a small suitcase and quietly disappeared. Rafaela wandered through their huge house, thinking she wouldn't be able to live here after the divorce. It was too painful to look around. The collection of family photos in beautiful frames scattered around the house was worth so much. Her eyes kept falling on the photos, and yet she didn't want to destroy or break them. They were part of her life, and denying that would be foolish. She decided not to tell their sons about the upcoming changes just yet. She would talk about the possible court session later when the time was right. She was afraid of their sharp reactions, that they would label their father a scoundrel and her, perhaps, a failure of a woman who couldn't keep her beloved man. She flipped through the pages of the past once again. What was her mistake? A fatal turn of events? Or was everything already predestined? Rafaela once again thought warmly of her father. How disappointed would he be now, knowing that her separation from Fernando was inevitable? He seemed to respect Fernando. Or did he only pretend to in order to please her? Rafaela suddenly remembered. Alberto Garcia had advised her to conduct an external audit of her father's company, and she hadn't done anything in that direction yet. And she didn't have the right contacts in that area. Once again, she would have to turn to her friend and also tell her about the changes in her personal life. Her friend was probably burning with curiosity to know if Rafaela had figured out anything after Fernando's strange conversation at the banquet. She called Paulina. An hour later, they were drinking wine in the garden gazebo, discussing the empty-headed young lovers. Rafaela instructed that the results of the audit at the metallurgical plant be kept confidential for the time being. Her current close friend worked in the appropriate agencies. He helped keep the case from moving forward until the divorce court hearing, which had already been scheduled. This was within his capabilities and expertise. Rafaela was calm, like a snake. She had prepared well for her meeting with her husband and the new love of his life. Alberto Garcia had not been idle either. He had carefully gone through all the papers left by his friend. During this work, he smiled a few times. "Oh, you sly fox, Alejandro. You've signed something, re-signed something, handled property deals 100 times. Seems like, in the course of all these preparations, you managed to sneak a prenuptial agreement past your son-in-law. And Rafaela's signature is on it. I should call her right away." He paused to consider. Does Fernando know about the prenuptial agreement? Rafaela confirmed confidently during their phone conversation that she knew about the prenuptial agreement. When her father prepared it with the lawyers, she was so engrossed in a fascinating coastal project that she signed the document on the go, trusting her father and husband completely, both of whom were present at the time. Alberto was taken aback. So Fernando also knew about the prenuptial agreement. Their family was strange after all. They signed documents without looking. They trusted each other until a certain point, and then everything was sacrificed to a new passion. Oh, love, you know how to rob people of their sanity, effortlessly. Patricia tolerated Fernando's presence in her apartment. She had several reasons for this. First, there were only a couple of weeks left until the divorce trial. Second, the pregnancy test had come back positive. She was already dreaming of marrying Fernando, living in wealth, and tolerating the rest. She had learned to play at love. There were no failures. Before falling asleep, sweetly resting her head on her almost husband's shoulder, she figured out how she would tell him the stunning news. She would approach him, hug him, and ask, "Sweetheart, do you think I resemble a chipmunk?" He would join the game and start guessing, knowing that she could come up with anything. Then, she would triumphantly declare, "You didn't guess. I'm the chipmunk because I'm pregnant." She squeezed her eyes shut, imagining how Fernando would carry her in his arms, shower her with expensive gifts, buy a new special wardrobe for mothers, and provide a dowry for their future baby only from the most elite stores. They would need to discuss paying his wife half the value of their house. A proper family should move into these magnificent quarters. It wouldn't be right for the baby to grow up cramped. Meanwhile, Fernando, completely unaware, was praying that Patricia wouldn't get pregnant. He was already getting older. He could do without all these kinder surprises. He already had 2 sons, and that was enough to satisfy his fatherly instincts. He and Patricia were so good together, just the 2 of them. He preferred to continue pampering and cherishing her. The man was certain that the divorce case would end in his complete triumph. He knew that Rafaela was a decent and caring person. She would generously share everything with him, even though he had essentially betrayed her. She had to understand that love doesn't ask when it will strike. After they divided the property, he would quietly take the metallurgical plant from her as well. He just needed to tell Patricia to behave decently in court and not act with all her youthful maximalism. The adults could figure everything out without her interference. The court session was open. Before the trial, Rafaela told her sons everything, and now she sat next to her lawyer, proudly surveying the full courtroom. Behind her, Paulina occasionally whispered her impressions. Beside her, her loyal friend sat silently, waiting for the moment when he could give his subordinates the command to attack. Fernando and his mistress smiled contentedly, not expecting any surprises. Any such session was tedious. Even though the judge studied all the materials in advance, questions inevitably arose. This time was no different. First, they announced the agenda of the court, then introduced everyone involved. Fernando even thought that this whole circus was unnecessary. He would have stayed in the dark and puzzled about it, but then Alberto Garcia spoke. He informed the court that during the preparation of documents, several additional circumstances had been discovered. He placed copies of the papers in front of the judge and asked permission to explain certain details. He read aloud the prenuptial agreement, the will with special conditions and stipulations. At the end of his speech, he added that there were further questions regarding Fernando from the relevant authorities after a covert financial audit had been carried out. At these words, the judge nodded knowingly. The ground slipped out from under Fernando's feet. Patricia, after hearing all this, grabbed his arm and whispered, "I don't understand. We won't get anything. We'll be left with nothing. I'm pregnant, Fernando. Do you hear me? We're going to have a baby." Her lover looked at her with confused, glassy eyes. While the court took a break to deliberate on the divorce, Paulina's friend showed him a mocking trinket, a keychain in the shape of small handcuffs. Fernando understood the hint immediately. Now, he had no doubt that the audit had uncovered all his dirty deeds. Suddenly, he didn't care that after separating from Rafaela, he would be left with nothing, and his wife would become much wealthier. He was likely going to prison for a long time. Hopefully, they wouldn't arrest him right in the courtroom. Rafaela won. Sitting next to her, Patricia kept buzzing, accusing him of all the sins in the world. And he guessed. Maybe this girl never really loved him. She loved his money, that's for sure. She liked the gifts, that's a fact. She probably flattered him to get what she wanted. Fernando jerked. Patricia said something about being pregnant, or maybe he misheard. This was the last thing he needed right now. To be left with nothing. Not even money for diapers. Would she wait for him for several years? He glanced at his princess, who was admiring her freshly done manicure, which she had specifically prepared for the trial. Such astonishing carefreeness and a habit of thinking he would take care of everything. Had she already forgotten everything she just heard? Did she think that now the judge would announce his decision, everything would fall into place, and she would leave the courtroom as a rich young lady? Fernando hardly listened to what the judge was reading out to the room and to him and Rafaela first. He only realized that after the divorce and division of property, he would indeed be left with almost nothing. Patricia was in shock. Even with her girlish naivety, she understood that this wasn't even the court's decision, it was a sentence to all her hopes. The only thought that kept running through Patricia's mind now was, no matter how this all ends, I'm not getting rid of the baby. Even if Fernando gets into serious trouble, I can handle it, and I'll do everything for our future baby. She didn't vocalize her intentions. Yes, no one, seeing her pretty face and slim figure, would think she was serious about motherhood. It sometimes only seemed empty. Rafaela left the courtroom satisfied. She already knew that Fernando would be arrested the next day on charges of large-scale fraud. Did she feel sorry for him and Patricia? It was strange, but she did. Rafaela wasn't a vengeful person. She just wanted justice. Even her heart no longer hurt so much. She wanted to return to her design sketches, drown in flowers, forget, but no longer seek revenge. For a moment, it even seemed to her that the statue of Themis in the corner had removed its blindfold and winked at her, approving her thoughts. She also remembered her favorite phrase from Alberto Garcia, "The law is harsh, but it is the law." Rafaela and Paulina sat in the garden, sipping red wine and chatting. On the lawn, 3 rascals were crawling in the grass under the watchful eye of the nanny. "Rafaela, I understand, of course, that your country house by the sea is huge, and you get bored being alone there. I approve of you bringing the grandchildren for the whole summer. But why are you bringing Patricia's daughter to stay as well? This is starting to smell like absurdity." Rafaela looked up at her friend, squinted, adjusted her sunglasses, and then explained. "This girl turned out to be an amazing mother and wife for Fernando. She goes to the prison to visit him, sends parcels, brings packages. I didn't think any of this would surprise me. It won't take anything away from me. Her sons lived in complete comfort. What more could she wish for? Everything turned out as it turned out. It's just a shame that Fernando decided to show his true character. He said something rude, insulted the prison authorities. He lost the chance to apply for early release. Sometimes I feel like I didn't really know my husband. I was always lost in my creative clouds, and he was walking on sinful ground. Patricia managed to see something different in him, and look, she had his child. She's studying at university now, getting her degree soon. And she'll wait for Fernando's return, I'm sure of it." Paulina smirked and closed the conversation. "Well, my friend, the court has made its decision. I won't tease you and ask about the guy who was pacing around the fence yesterday. I have a feeling he's your new heartthrob. I totally approve. Very handsome man. And, from his attire, it seems like he's one of us, one of the creative types." Rafaela immediately tossed a peach pit at her curious friend. "My life here is starting to take on a new meaning. I don't want to jinx it, so I'm not telling you yet. I promise, you'll be the first to wish me luck with my new man. Let happiness settle near me again."
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.